back to the MJ SportsCast. This is Mike Tang. I'm joined by my host, as always, Jerry. Jerry, how you doing today?
Good man, like the NCAA March Madness tournament's on its way, and a few upsets, but now I think Duke and UNC is going to be a really good matchup, right? So it might be Coach K's last year. So he already announced it, right? Did he announce he's retiring? Might be his last game, I guess. So
Yeah, this is his last season here, and what I found kind of cool is that UNC and Duke has never faced each other in the NCAA tournament.
oh yeah,
You would think that they would have faced each other at least
yeah.
once, out of their storied history together
Mhm.
here. So that should be a pretty good matchup. Um, what did you think of the 15th seed, the Peacocks?
Yeah, the
Moving
St.
on, they
Peters.
moved on to the Elite Eight, or not the Elite Eight. This was it.
Oh, it
Yeah, it
was
was
Elite
the
Eight.
Elite
It was the
Eight.
first team to reach Elite Eight, right? So before Villanova took them out. But yeah, that was awesome, man. I'm glad to see upsets and Cinderella stories. I mean, that's what you look for in March Madness overall, right? So it was kind of cool to see that. I was rooting for them, against Villanova too. But I guess, at some point the Cinderella story does run out. But I think that coach for St. Peter's is going to get a lot of accolades, considering he's able to take pretty much a no-name team or school to the Elite Eight, right? So I can imagine he's going to get some job offers from maybe one of the top tier teams.
It's got me thinking, who is the best college athletic team in the Bay Area? And I'm thinking with this tournament, Division One, St. Mary's,
Hmm.
out of Northern California is one. USF, made it into the tourney, but they got bounced out in the first round here. And then from the women's side, we're looking at Stanford basketball. They're the reigning champions, and I feel like they don't get a whole lot of attention, out here in the Bay. And they're, in the Final Four, about to face UConn this Friday evening. Um, why do you think women's basketball, women's athletics, they just get no love out here? They're one of the best college teams, within the last 10 years, I would say.
Yeah, most
Tara Vanderveer has been with the program for almost 30 years or so, and they got something good going, but it just seems like no one really cares.
Well, I think that speaks to, unfortunately, women's basketball as a whole, right? I don't think there was a lot of chatter even at the pro level, right? WNBA is still not highly rated like the NBA is, not nearly as high, right? So I think it's just the nature of the sport. So I don't think it's really. It kind of reminds me of soccer a little bit, where men's U.S. soccer isn't really talked about, right? It's not really a big sport here in the U.S., unfortunately. But women's soccer is the U.S. team is one of the best. It's one of the best teams. I think the individual players are starting to get some recognition, right? Like Megan Rapinoe and Alex Morgan. They're getting some recognition, but not for unfortunately, they're on the field play, right? So the popularity of this sport, I think, has a lot to do with the buzz and the talk of those players and of the team. So unfortunately, Stanford kind of rolls into that. But to your point, I don't know if there's a really dominant NCAA school really in the Bay Area. Unfortunately, I think Stanford had its run for a while in the men's side as well, right? With the Lopez brothers, but since then, I don't know. We've heard much from a basketball perspective, men's basketball perspective, that really went far in the tournament, right? So,
Yeah, unfortunately, the West Coast, they are deemed as kind of having weaker competition out there in the college athletics side, meaning that you have some of the higher tier, like ACC schools, recruiting some of the best players in the country.
yeah.
And we kind of are left with, some of these players that are, pretty good, but they're not like elite NBA level per se. So it's a tough situation being in the Pac-12.
Agreed. I mean, even on the football side, right? Andrew Luck was probably, with Harbaugh, I think that was the only era I could think of with Stanford. They were relevant, and then Cal, I think, was relevant at one point. But other than that, I think the Bay Area teams, especially in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, we haven't really had a good team or a good school that stood out,
Yeah.
so we'll see. Hopefully things will change. I mean, all the money is flowing through here, right, in the Bay Area. So there's bound to be some attraction, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah, there's quite a few topics to discuss today here. We usually start with the NFL, Jerry, but I'll leave it up to you and where you want to start here. Typical Niner stuff as we always see this off season. It feels like we're kind of going in circles with a lot of these storylines.
Well, let's
And
go with MLB. Let's get that out of the way because I think next week next week I think it's opening week, right?
yeah, it
So
looks like next Thursday will be its first set of games
yeah.
here, and it's pretty exciting times for the Giants. They had a pretty decent offseason, I would say. Here, a lot of fans want to spend a lot of money, but I think the Giants kind of stayed within their budget
Mhm.
here. But what do you think about Logan Webb, starting game one and the rest of the offense?
Yeah, I think that was pretty awesome. I think it's one of the first home openers in a while, and they said it was the first homegrown right-handed pitcher, opening day starter since Matt Cain. So I think that's
Mhm.
pretty notable because that was in 2013. So it's been 9 years now since that happened. So that's pretty cool stat. But I'm excited that the season's happening. I think for a while it was getting kind of grim. We didn't know how the CBA and all that stuff was going to turn out.
Yeah.
But now we're back, so that's good news, right? So hopefully we see more action here.
Yeah, right before the season starts, however, we have a couple key injuries. Lamont Wade Jr. Looks like he had a little bit of bone bruising on
Mhm.
his left knee. He won't start opening day. That's a little disappointing for him because he was slated to be in that outfield slot. And then your boy Evan Longoria is he is I think he had like a finger procedure here, and
Oh,
that kind of stemmed from last season as well. And
mm,
Longoria has just had a bad run and a bad luck of injuries during his tenure as a Giant here, but he was really dependent on being in the lineup against left-handed pitching, especially with Chris Bryant, Buster Posey, being out of the lineup now. We really needed Evan Longoria to step up because the Giants didn't really sign any right-handed bats this offseason here. They re-signed a guy like Darren Ruff to a new 2-year deal. But I think the Achilles heel for this Giants team, especially last season, was left-handed pitching.
mhm.
Did you see anything else from this offseason?
No, I think Lamont Wade was a big deal, right, with his injury there. But one of the things I saw and read is potentially Joey Bart might get an opportunity with all these injuries, right? And he seems like he's more ready to return. Kapler didn't commit to him being a starter. He still mentioned that Castaldi and him will probably compete for the catcher position, but I felt like the Giants didn't do much. They could have done more, in this offseason. But, in terms of Evan Longoria, good thing it's his last season. I think after this season, we're done with that contract and moving on, right? And I think the Giants, hopefully, with that freed up money and freed up cap space, would do a big splash signing next year, and I think what they're banking on this year is really some of the prospects really coming up and stepping up and being the stars, right? Especially without Posey there, I don't think they have a choice otherwise. So we'll see. I mean, the good news is I think the starting pitching is solidified for the most part, and even with guys like Tyler Beatty that's like trying to make the roster. At least we have some depth there. I think now, whereas last season that was a point of weakness. So
Yeah.
so yeah. I'm not sure, man. I think that 80, what was it, the 89 win season or an 88 wins actually seem more and more accurate as time goes on. But I think, in general, we're pretty pessimistic going into the season. But the last couple years, the Giants have really surprised us with their record, and their runs to their playoff run. So we'll see if it happens this year, but maybe. So
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think the projection now is 87 wins or so
Mhm,
here. And I still pick the over, to be honest with you, just because I think the Giants will find ways to win quite a few games this season here, mixing and matching, especially in the starting lineup. And I think the addition of Randon
mhm,
is going to bolster this um, this rotation here. And they also added, a guy like Alex Cobb in there as well. So they have a pretty darn stable rotation with Alex Wood, Dave Sclafani
mhm.
there. So they don't really have a lot of weaknesses unless there's injuries.
Do you think the bullpen kind of scares you though? That was also kind of questionable last season, right? What do you think about that?
I think the bullpen will be fine the way it is so far. I think the league has gravitated against velocity
Mm,
and more towards two seam fastballs and putting pitches onto the ground. And
I see.
the league hasn't banned shifts yet, right? I
No,
don't.
not until next year. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not banned. So I think the Giants will definitely exploit that too. They were one of the teams that really exploited the infield shifts and being able to position their defensive players that are suitable, for those ground ball pitchers there.
Mhm.
So I think the Giants will be fine. I think they're going to win at least 90 games this coming season, but they still, they have to overcome injuries, especially in the offensive side of the ball.
And one rule I heard that's almost like they're kind of calling it like the Giants rule, right? Is that they're limiting call ups for minor league to three now. Otherwise, they have to hit the wire. Do you think that's gonna impact the Giants at all? Because I think that the reason why they're able to keep the roster so strong last season was they were able to, send guys to the minor league and call them up, many times, right? So I don't know, like I don't know how big of an impact that is to the Giants, but it seems like they created that rule just for us,
Yeah. No, I think for this season, there's going to be more position players that will stay, with the big league roster
Mhm,
here and will need less, of that whole going back and forth
mhm.
between AAA and the big leagues. So I think the Giants will be fine in that regard.
The Farhan rule, huh? And that's what they called it, the Farhan rule.
Yeah. Let's move on to the NBA here, just really quick. The Warriors have been really on a downward spiral here. They went on like a 1-4 road trip or so, got blown out by the Grizzlies this past week. Draymond Green doesn't look the same. He just looks like he's struggling out there. He's not really physically in shape. Um, and I think the Warriors are kind of counting on having those 3 or 4 players healthy: Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Andre Iguodala, in the first round of the playoffs here. But we haven't seen those guys play, this season, really, especially with Klay being out in the beginning. Do you think the Warriors, do they have a chance out there in that first round? Do you think they're going to get out of it here? I know you've been pretty critical of the team down the stretch, but has anything changed at all? And
I
what
don't
you've
know.
seen?
I mean, at least we got Iguodala back. I think that's good news. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Draymond maybe he has higher expectations of himself, maybe. But I
Mhm.
think coming off of injury is never an easy thing, right? To actually get back into game shape, and I think we're seeing it on the court. I think he had the quote where he says, I've never really been on a team that gets worse when I'm on the floor, and I think that kind of speaks true to how he is right now. And that's what he said as well. That's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge, right? Like not having Draymond in the right mental state. He's always been the leader, the guy, the rah guy to get people to try harder. And if he's kind of down, that kind of concerns me. But
Mhm.
the biggest concern for me really is Steph Curry, right? I mean, goes without saying, if Steph Curry can't come back for the playoffs, I don't care if you have Clay and Iguodala and Draymond back, you're still going to lose series, right? You're not going to. You might win a few games, but
Yeah.
how do you even close out the series without Curry? Like I know he's not that great in the playoffs sometimes, but he's still an X factor, right? You still need him and not need him. So I don't know. I'm pretty concerned. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty concerned, dude.
I think it would be more concerning if we're on this tailspin and we're losing games with Curry on the floor right now.
Yeah,
That would be even more concerning. But since he's not on the floor and we're losing and we don't have our full lineup there's still some hope. And there's also hope that Draymond will turn it on in the playoffs, which he has in the
yeah.
past, right? So you
Mhm.
really can't discount him for doing that. But right now it looks grim. I would say this is one of its low point for Warrior fans here, especially starting the season so strong. I think they start what 10-2 or something
Yeah.
like that. Um, yeah, they could fall down to the fifth seed. You know,
Dude, I know 10-2, and we knew Clay Thompson's coming back. I think at that point it was kind of like hopes were high. What I mean, seeing the core three together, I think makes a big difference. We obviously saw it for one game, right, where the core three were playing together this season. But then after that, it went downhill. So yeah, I think that's a question mark right now. Let's see how Curry is when he comes back. I think I have faith in Draymond figuring it out, right? I think these next 3 games or so is kind of a tough stretch in the schedule. And he's also, coming off of injury, so he's not gonna be 100%. But once he settles in, he feels a little more comfortable, schedule loosens up a little bit right before the playoffs, and we'll see how he is then. If he's saying this right then maybe we'll be a little bit more concerned. But yeah, I think the key is to stay healthy as usual, right? I think championship teams get lucky with health. I think the Warriors have been really lucky in the last 3 championships that we had. We haven't had the major injury until the last one. The last finals performance was obviously injury ridden, and that's the only thing that stopped us, right? So we'll see how it goes. I think one guy I'm really disappointed in is Wiggins, right? I would want him to step it up with these guys gone. I think Jordan Poole's really stepped it up. Kuminga's actually doing pretty well, right? Getting those developmental minutes in. I think Moody's a guy that needs to step up as well. We haven't seen much from him. We need him to develop, right? At least to be a good bench player, be a good player off the bench. But I think those are a few call outs. I think we'll see how it goes with those guys, but I think those are valuable minutes though for Kaminga, right? I think
yeah.
he's looked really good. I think for for being put in this situation, having to start and having to be the star a few times. So
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to depend on matchups too, right? Where if they go into the playoffs having to, face Gobert, face Jokic, there, that center position is pretty thin. The Warriors kind of took a risk, counting on James Wiseman to provide some depth towards the end of the season,
right.
and the Warriors did nothing in the trade deadline. And you really can't go into a 7-game series facing a guy like Jokic with Looney and Bijalica out there and not less than 100% Draymond Green. In the past, you can give 20-25 minutes to guys like JaVale McGee,
Mhm.
David West,
Right.
um, and some other guys that we've had in the past. So it's going to be very different because I think this team is going to count on small ball a whole lot more,
Yep.
and we'll see if they'll be able to survive.
Yeah, and I think Bob Myers mentioned the reason why they didn't get anyone in is they didn't see anyone good out there, right? Someone that fits their system that can be plug and play, and obviously fit within their salary cap, right? I think the team's a little different now. Now that you have, Curry, Draymond, and Curry as the top three, or sorry, Clay, Curry, and Draymond as the top three highest players on the team, right? Doesn't give you much wiggle room, I think, to really sign in new guys. So that that's I think the unfortunate reality of things. And I think Wiggins also takes up a lot of our salary cap as well, right? So I don't know. I agree with you though. I think one of the biggest disappointment was James Wiseman. I think the Warriors were really counting on having him back as a true center to help out and relieve
Hmm.
Looney a little bit. I think Looney's pretty improved this season, right? He's a lot better than last season. So I think he's one of the most improved players on the team at least. But like you said, I don't know if we can count on him against the big stars. So
Yeah. Moving on to some of the NFL stuff in the Bay. Here, let's talk about D Ford. Looks like the D Ford saga will be coming to a close. What exactly happened with him? Did the Niners waive D Ford and
yeah.
just waived off some of his contract money, or what's going on with that financially?
Well, they can't cut him yet until June 1st. After June 1st, there's like a money saving or like a lesser of a cap hit, right? But Lynch was on the interview for NBC Sports Bay Area where he doesn't think they're gonna move forward with him, mainly because of injuries, right? He just can't get healthy. So they're looking like they're gonna move on from him once that June 1st deadline comes by. But overall, that's pretty disappointing. I think last season when we started, we saw a few good games with him, but then that back injury just keeps giving him grief. And considering how much money and how much we traded for him, it's disappointing overall. I think his career hasn't been the same since he was with KC. Ironically, the peak was beating the Niners in the Super Bowl, right? I think the Niners saw a lot in him when he did do that, and that's why they
Yeah.
traded for him. But he's never been a difference maker for us, really. Especially only playing what sparse third downs. But they were really hoping that he's going to be a guy like Bosa that can complement Bosa on the edge. So we'll see. But yeah,
Yeah, it's tough because when you look at D Ford, you're looking at kind of Hall of Fame talent in a sense, right? He kind of reminds me a little bit of Bruce Smith from the
mm-hmm.
older Buffalo Bills there, but Bruce Smith was able to stay on the field and he's a Hall of Fame player, and if Alden Smith was able to stay healthy, I think the sky would have been the limit for him and he would have been able to accumulate a whole lot of sacks for his career. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Oh, you mean D Ford, right? Not
D
Alden
Ford.
Smith. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
D
sound
Ford.
no, I think Alden Smith is there's other issues going on there. Yeah, no, I agree. I think he was a high impact player, but I think the style of play is why he gets hurt so much. So that's unfortunate. The good news is I think Lynch mentioned Alex Max coming back, so center. I think it's probably gonna be his last season in 2022, but he was a solid linchpin last season. I think the center position is underrated in a lot of ways. But I think the season before we saw some instability with the center position and probably caused a lot of losses for us. But once we got Alex Mack last season, it seemed to stabilize that position in that line. So I'm excited for Mack to come back at least. It sounds like we signed Jeff Wilson and Ross Dwelly as well. So I think the Niners are doing a good job in keeping the existing pieces together and adding, Ward to the cornerback position. I imagine that in the draft, since it's so deep with offensive linemen, that we'll probably get like a right guard or possible backup, left center or left tackle, right? So we'll see. Maybe even a center position to kind of replace Alex Mack in the long run. But it's good. This draft is pretty deep offensive line overall. So I think in the second round we can still get a pretty high-profile center here.
So deep in the offensive line, are we looking at Aaron Banks to be starting there because of some of the key free agent losses that
Yeah,
we've?
he's gonna replace Lincoln Thomason, right? I
Yeah.
think Lynch already said that that's gonna happen, barring injury, right? I think that's what set back Aaron Banks last season was he actually got hurt during OTAs, right? And this was a late catch up, and they just never put him in because of that. So we'll see. We'll see how Aaron Banks does. I think it sounds promising at least. Hopefully, he stays healthy in the preseason activities and gets ready for the season. So, what's up, G says, sorry, late to the party. Are we stuck with Jimmy G? The answer is yes, we are. So let's, the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Jimmy G. My thoughts on it. I think I talked about it last week, so maybe I'll let you, first talk about it, and then I can kind of weigh in. But what do you think? Do you think we're stuck with him?
It's a tough situation, right? Because for one, the pros of keeping him is that okay, you're going to have a very strong quarterback competition, right? And your quarterback situation will be okay, right? But at the same time, what kind of message are you sending to Trey Lance too? In keeping Jimmy Garoppolo around, you might send the message that you don't have confidence in your quarterback, and that may not be a good thing for a guy like Trey Lance here. And also the con is that then you're going to have a lot of that $22 or $25 million stuck on a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, and he's also not part of your future. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think the biggest con, and I think Beastwire mentioned this on one of his tweets, is he divided the locker room, right? I think a lot of the veterans were behind Jimmy G because obviously they're kind of in win now mode. They want to get in the ring. They know Jimmy as a leader. They're supporting the veterans, right? Whereas younger guys are supporting Trey Lance because they have time to develop. They want to see Trey become the long term solution. They have time in their career to kind of see the progression and be able to grow with Trey, right? So I think having Jimmy there, that's the biggest issue to me, right? Is the locker room is going to be divided there. And in terms of Jimmy G's contract, I guess you could restructure. A lot of people were, kind of questioning what it means to restructure. I think, I'll just lay out here. Basically, you're not really saving money when you're restructuring. You're actually just paying out the contract earlier in bonuses. So the player does it because they get guaranteed money. The team does it because it doesn't hit your salary cap anymore, right? The example is Kittle. I think they paid out his $30 million of his of his contract that was old or whatever in bonuses this year, and he only had like a $5 million cap hit. Yeah, that's like an example of it. So you could do that, right? And a lot of people are misconstruing that. Hey, what if we restructure Jimmy's contract and then trade him? But you're not going to invest that money into a player guaranteed money just to trade them, right? And a team doesn't want to absorb a $25 million contract just to pay $20 million of it up front, right? So I think it's a tricky situation. I think that's why we're kind of stuck with him. I think I saw today Andy Dalton got signed. I think it was only owed $8 million, right? So, and a lot of people were asking me like, "Hey, why didn't and the Saints signed him right to a 1 year contract? I think 3 million, 8 million with bonuses, whatever." So a lot of people were saying, "Hey, Andy Dalton is not as good as Jimmy. Why can't Jimmy be the backup?" And my response back is 25 million. That's the biggest problem. 25 million. You're gonna miss OTAs, right? You're gonna miss a lot of the preseason activities because of that surgery. You don't know how Jimmy G is when he comes back. Is he still gonna be able to throw the ball? That's an open question mark right now. And What's Up G says, if I was a GM, I had to choose between Mayfield, Garoppolo, I'd take Mayfield. Mayfield had a bad year because he got hurt trying to make a tackle. Baker isn't that bad. And yeah, I think Baker is owed only 18 million as well. So I can see the ceiling being higher for Mayfield. I think the only knock against Mayfield is really his attitude, right? His maturity. And the lack of leadership. So a little bit of Wentz, Wentz combined with a little bit of a bad attitude. But I do agree that over time he can probably mature, and probably the Browns dropping him might humble Baker a little bit. I think it got to his head a little bit with all the State Farm commercials and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But I mean, what do you think? Do you think Baker is better than Jimmy or what?
I think it's kind of a moot point, especially for 49ers fans. Just also because we're not going to get Baker Mayfield, but I think in terms of potential,
Yeah,
Baker Mayfield definitely has that over Jimmy Garoppolo
yeah,
here. He can definitely be a better player than Jimmy. I think what we've seen from Jimmy is pretty capped at this point. This is who he is. He's basically a quick throwing,
hmm,
short passer. He's not going to, take over games. He's not going to be able to bring you back from a 21-point deficit on his own. Here, he's just a stable guy. He's a guy where you need pieces around him. You need a running game. You need a great defense. You need great players here,
yeah,
and that's what's stopping teams from really acquiring Jimmy Garoppolo is that 25 million, and then also the prospect of having to re-sign him right after,
right.
and the pressure of doing that. No team wants to do that for Jimmy G
Yeah,
at this.
and the reason why this conversation with Baker versus Garoppolo is relevant for the Niners is because of the trade market, right? Because obviously, I think Mayfield is in the trade market. He's not going to be a backup, an $18 million backup for Watson, so I think that's why it's relevant because teams are asking them the same question, right? Do we want Mayfield or do we want Garoppolo?
Yeah,
So I don't think it's a matter of Niners getting him or not. It's just a matter of that market. So, and then yeah, what's up? G echo that, right? I'm saying if I'm going to trade for a quarterback, I trade for Baker over Jimmy, and I tend to agree.
yeah,
Like I said, the potential, the $7 million savings, the injury risk to Jimmy, right? I think Jimmy, we still know how that shoulder surgery is going to be. Like obviously the team downplayed it, saying it's successful, but you don't know until he actually throws, right? What if he needs like another surgery? What if it's like an Alex Smith situation?
yeah,
Like you don't know, right? So that's why there's a lot of risk. I do think it was interesting though that Kyle Shanahan said that there is possibility of Trey and Jimmy G being on the roster. And he didn't name a starter, right? They asked him who will be the starter. And I also thought it was interesting that Lynch said there was no trade offers, actually, not a single one for Jimmy G. Like the 2 second-round picks was all fluff and rumors, that came up. But he confirmed that that was not on the table for him at all. So kind of depressing. I think right now they can't say they're going to cut Jimmy because that loses all leverage. But if they do cut him, maybe the thinking outside the box type of thing is maybe we sign them back for a lesser contract as a pure backup then. Right?
I think the
But
ultimate question is Jimmy Garoppolo going to be a starter in the beginning of this coming season for any team, right? And it's more leaning towards a no at this point.
right.
It's pretty tough. And
I
I think,
agree because some of the quarterbacks in the draft, I think a lot of teams and analysts were underestimating them actually, right? Until they saw the pro days.
yeah,
When they saw the pro days of some of these guys, I think that reinvigorated some of the teams. I think I can see the Panthers trying to make a play for one of those quarterbacks if it falls in the second round, and I think that's also what's preventing a trade from happening. The Panthers are kind of waiting around to see if one of the top quarterbacks in the draft land in their in their lap as in the second round, right? So the Panthers don't have a first round pick, right? So so they're kind of banking on chance to see if that happens. And I wouldn't be surprised in the draft if maybe a trade happens with the Panthers if all the quarterbacks in the draft are taken, right? I think that's going to be the telling point. But I think if we walk out of the draft and Jimmy G is still on our roster, that's when I can see them cutting him, right?
yeah.
Um, so we'll see. The,
Well,
the the draft is happening in almost exactly a month, so we'll find out in a couple weeks, I guess.
yeah, I mean, there's no rush for the 49ers to cut him at this point. right? They
Yeah.
just leave him on the roster and just kind of see how, I guess, the market materializes,
Mhm.
either through some sort of team that's desperate for a quarterback because they didn't draft one, or because of a team that's out there, no quarterback from the draft or free agency, and they just need someone serviceable. And I think Jimmy could be that guy for some teams.
Yeah, we'll see, and I'm just amazed by how much of a drop off Jimmy G's stock has been, right? I think the peak of when we probably should have traded Jimmy G was probably in 2019, in that Super Bowl loss. I think we didn't foresee it, right? Obviously. And I think the injury bug really hit him in 2020, so we couldn't really forecast it. But then the team kind of telegraphed that they're gonna move on from him by trading loads of picks to get a third round pick to get Trey Lance. So I think there was a lot of miscalculation from the front office here that needs to be, accounted for. I think Lynch, if he bobbled this trade and it turns out Trey Lance isn't ready, I don't know, man. I feel like we have to move on from this front office. You know.
Yeah, it's tough because when Shanahan and Lynch inherited this team, they didn't really have a quarterback. We were dealing with a lot of CJ Beathard stuff, Nick Mullins, and then they got an offer from Belichick to acquire Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy comes onto the team towards the end of the season. I think we haven't won a game yet. He goes on a 5-game winning streak to end the season. Everyone loves Jimmy. They give him that contract extent. They give him that big contract there without really evaluating him throughout the whole season. Um, and I don't think Jimmy's really been their go-to guy, to be honest with you, right? If Shanahan was to handpick anyone, and it's been well documented in the past, is probably someone like Kirk Cousins. But I don't think Shanahan has really been 100% on Jimmy Garoppolo, and it's just been kind of like a forced relationship, to be honest with you. And the injuries have really, really screwed up this whole relationship with the 49ers. Even right now, their injury and that shoulder surgery,
Yeah.
it has hindered their way to maneuver through this. So
Yeah.
it's been a really, really rocky relationship.
Yeah, I think what I'm also surprised by is how Shanahan, being the offensive genius, isn't that great at evaluating quarterbacks. Like CJ Beathard, they traded to get him in the second round. So it's not like he's a late round pick and he didn't pan out. So if you're picking a guy in the second round, you would assume he's gonna be a starter someday, and that just never happened. And a lot of when we signed Jimmy G, the draft right after was a quarterback heavy draft. That's where Watson was, Patrick Mahomes was in that draft. We would have had a chance at one of those guys, but I think we totally fumbled that one, right? I think that's the draft where we got Solomon Thomas for our first round pick. I think at the time people were cheering that pick, but then looking back on it, that was a terrible idea. So I guess
And
hindsight's 2020, but
And that was one of the reasons why Lynch and Shanahan traded all those picks for a guy like Trey Lance, because they didn't want to make that same mistake again,
mm,
knowing that they had Mahomes and those guys right in the tip of their fingers. They went over there and scouted them and evaluated these quarterbacks, and they passed. And that's got to hurt. And also losing to Mahomes in the Super Bowl back in 2019.
that was just like the icing on the cake, right? Like where you're just like, oh, that hurts.
It's just a lot of pain to be it's a lot of pain when you haven't won a Super Bowl since 1994.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a long time coming, and
And
there's
and
just
we've
been a lot
been
of heartbreak, and you're
yeah.
just kind of dealing with all these transactions that could have been.
And we're nibbling at the hips of it too, like from this season being really close, to a Super Bowl. And then obviously in 2019 being in the Super Bowl. I think if we had a better quarterback, maybe things would have been different. And Solomon Thomas was great, did great for the Raiders. This was a G. He did, but I think he's no longer with the Raiders anymore, right? Didn't they Never mind, they re-signed him. So yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. I think yeah, it's sure he was good for the Raiders, but he didn't work out for us. So actually,
Yeah.
I think the Jets signed him. The Jets signed Solomon Thomas a 1 year deal, so he's doing a reunion with Salah, right? So
Yeah. I mean, I think we can go on and on about this topic here. And let's move on to the picks of the week, Jerry.
let's do it. All right. So the Warriors are playing the Suns at home tomorrow. Right? The mighty Suns were underdogs, no surprise, at +7. I think Vegas finally adjusted. I think the last few games the Warriors were favored,
Yeah.
and they got blown out. So this time they're actually getting points. And the over under is 224. Mike, who do you have?
Okay. First, I'm going to pick the over under here. I've been picking the over, and it hasn't worked out, especially with this struggling offense. So I'm going to pick the under here at 224. I think the Warriors are definitely going to struggle a little bit, especially without Curry here. And we just don't know what we're getting, out of the rest of this roster, even with that extra rest coming back from the road trip here. So I'm going to pick the Suns. I think they're going to win by like 9 or 10 points, even
Wow.
against the Warriors at Chase Center. Just because I think the Suns are just a much better team, and they're a little bit more healthy, I believe, too.
Mhm.
They're just much better this season against the Warriors, even though the Warriors beat the Suns on that Christmas Day. But the Suns are just playing at a high level. I think they're the team to beat, to be honest with you, coming out of the West. So I'm picking the Suns here, and I think they're going to win by 9 points. What do you think?
Wow. Okay. Okay, so I'll start with the over under first. I do agree with you that lately it's been under. But what surprised me about this line is 224 is pretty high. It's one of the highest lines of the day, right? So for me, if I'm looking at trends of betting and all that stuff and taking picks, I would do the over actually. When you see a high line, usually you should take the over. Because Vegas likes to trap you as well. They
Yeah.
always the under is too juicy to pass up, and because of that, to kind of screw you over. So I would say I'll take the over there. As far as the line goes, the Suns have nothing really to play for, right? They've already clinched the number one seed at this point. The Warriors have more to play for. Clay's coming back, or Clay's back in this game. Draymond's back in this game, so they're gonna have today and yesterday off. And they're at home, so I think I'll take the Warriors +7 this time. I think it's gonna be a closer game than we think, mainly because I think the Warriors are a little bit more motivated. Not sure they'll win, right? If I wouldn't take the money line, not the points, I'll probably go with the Suns. I think the Suns still closes out the game. But I think the Warriors will try to show up this game, especially last game was such a disappointment. And we didn't talk about this, but Curry actually got ejected at halftime, so maybe that lit a fire under the team. I don't know, but yeah, I feel pretty comfortable with the Warriors +7 here.
Okay. Solid pick.
Man, like who would have thought would be so depressed about the Warriors right now?
Yeah, it's just a cycle of the sports life, right? You can get very high and you can get very low, and you
Mhm.
just need to find a proper median. And
So So
yeah,
let's look ahead, right? I think because I think there's not many games left. So we have the Suns today. We have the Jazz on Saturday, the Kings, and then the Lakers, the Spurs, and the Pelicans. So out of those 6 games, what do you think the Warriors score will be? Like would they go 3-3? You think we're gonna go 2-4? What do you
I
think?
think a safe bet would be 3-3. There, I think the Kings game, the Lakers game, and the Pelicans game are pretty winnable. Here, the rest I think are losses. To be honest with you, so I'm going to pick 3-3. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm leaning that direction too, but the Jazz at home kind of intrigues me a little bit. I think that could be potentially an upset. So maybe a 4-2 if we're lucky, but at this streak, the way we're going, and I think that's another reason why I think the Warriors is a good pick today is because the Warriors, I don't think, have gone on a 4-game losing streak yet this season, and they're potentially going to be if they lose this one. So I think
Yeah.
they're going to break the streak, right? I don't think they're going to settle for losing this game. So yeah, potentially 4-3 or 4-2, I would say. And I think the stretch isn't as easy as I thought. The Lakers imploded, completely. So I think that's going to be, like you said, a winnable game at home. So.
Yeah. All right. And then our shout out here.
We only have one. What's up, G? Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the questions and comments.
All right, guys. Well, that is the show for today. Thanks everyone for listening. Please press that subscribe button to wherever you're listening or watching here, and we will see you next week. Take care.